Middle East I. How did the Ottoman Caliphate end 100 years ago? This March marks the 100th anniversary of the decision by the Great Turkish National Assembly to abolish the caliphate that lasted for 1300 years. On March 3, 1924, which was a pivotal moment in the history of this republic, now inhabited by more than 85 million people. Middle East I published a report by the writer Imran Mullah, discussing the history of the abolition of the Ottoman Caliphate in 1924 as part of the endeavor of the founder of the Turkish Republic, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, to modernize the state and separate it from religion, explaining the reasons and repercussions of this historic decision. The writer pointed out that this decision is also a prominent milestone in the history of politics and Islam, marking the end of Ottoman rule that constituted a significant part of Europe, Africa, and the Middle East for nearly 6 centuries. He mentioned that the Caliphate was an Islamic political institution that considered itself representing the Caliphate of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the leadership of Muslims worldwide, so it was never devoid of controversy. Sometimes many Muslim rulers competed for the title of Caliph at the same time. How did the Ottoman Caliphate emerge? The writer mentioned that the Ottoman family, the ruling Ottoman dynasty, sought the Caliphate since the time of Sultan Selim I in 1512 after the Ottoman sultans captured the Abbasid Caliph, Muhammad ibn Yaqub al-Mustaqfi, and defeated the Mamluks after the Battle of Marj-Dabik in 1516, solidifying the position of the emerging Caliphate for decades to come. The Ottoman state then incorporated the Islamic holy cities of Mecca, Medina, and Jerusalem, as well as Baghdad, the former capital of the Abbasid Caliphate in the Middle Ages, in 1534. Historians in recent years have debated the validity of the previously common idea that the Ottomans were not interested in the Caliphate until the 19th century. The writer explained that the concept of the Caliphate was radically redefined in the 16th century by Sufi orders close to the Ottoman dynasty, transforming the Caliph into a figure with temporal and spiritual authority over his subjects. Thus, the imperial court began to present the Caliph previously described as the Sultan as the Caliph of God on earth. He added that the Ottoman Caliphate, whose nature was reinterpreted several times throughout the empire's history, lasted for 412 years, from 1512 to 1924. The last Caliph, Prince Abdul-Majid, born in 1868, spent most of his life under strict surveillance and restriction imposed by Sultan Abdul Hamid II on the princes of the ruling family. The writer noted that, after the overthrow of Abdul Hamid in a coup in 1909 and the establishment of the constitutional caliphate, Abdul-Majid, a talented painter and an enthusiast of classical music, became a modern public figure. Giving himself the title of democratic prince, his actions were not limited to painting a portrait of his predecessor Sultan Abdul Hamid during his deposition, but also taking a photo with the men who executed the deposition. The prince became despondent during World War I 1914 to 1918 due to the military defeat suffered by the empire, especially during the Allied occupation of Ottoman territories, including its capital Istanbul. Later, Muhammad Wahid al-Din became the caliph and sultan, with Abdul-Majid as the crown prince, making him the next in line for the throne. However, in 1919, Wahid al-Din refused to support the emerging nationalist movement led by Mustafa Kemal Pasha, later Ataturk, during its fight against the Allied forces in Anatolia. The writer mentioned that the nationalists' independence movement established the Grand National Assembly in Ankara on April 23, 1920, as the basis for a new political system. Later that year, Ataturk called Sultan Abdul-Majid to Anatolia to join the nationalist struggle. However, Dolmabahce Palace in Istanbul, where the prince lived, was surrounded by British soldiers. Abdul-Majid had no choice but to reject the offer, a stance later cited by the Republicans when the tide turned against the Caliphate. How did Abdul-Majid become the Caliph? The writer said that the armistice led to the victory of the nationalists and paved the way for the establishment of what was called modern Turkey in October 1922. Sultan Wahid al-Din was widely detested by his people, and on November 1, the new government abolished the Sultanate and, with it, the Ottoman Empire. Abdul-Majid left Istanbul shamefully aboard a British warship on November 17. In his absence, the government removed him from the Caliphate and offered the title instead to Abdul-Majid, who accepted it immediately and ascended to the Caliphate on November 24, 1922. For the first time, an Ottoman prince was supposed to become Caliph instead of Sultan, and he was elected to this role by the Grand National Assembly, the parliament of the Turkish Republic. The Republic and the Sultanate. The writer explained that the conflict began almost immediately. In his new role, Abdul-Majid was prohibited from making political statements. Instead, the government in Ankara presented a new vision of Islam, where the Caliph was merely a symbolic figure. But as his granddaughter Princess Neslihan later wrote, Abdul-Majid had no intention of adhering to the specified guidelines. It was reported that the New York Times informed its readers in April 1923 that the Caliph was a landscape painter, unlikely to cause any disturbance to anyone. The writer pointed out that this was a stark contradiction with the reality in Turkey, were the grandeur and popularity of Abdülmecit's weekly processions to various mosques in Istanbul for Friday prayers were increasingly causing concern in Ankara. On one occasion, the caliph arrived at a mosque by crossing the Bosphorus Strait aboard a large ship adorned with paintings and carrying the caliph's flag. The writer added that Caliph Abdülmecit was not a silent puppet. On the contrary, he hosted banquets, established the caliphate orchestra, and held political meetings in his palace, which greatly alarmed Ankara.